Good. Can you hear me? Thank you for coming back. Welcome to my talk, which is about this topic, which is Asesi Shirad Ashirad Rangwaithiol. That's the theme of the conference. So I'm trying to give a little bit of an overview, touching on quite a lot of what was talked about by Tony, but putting very much the language tester's hat on. So what does it mean for us, and what have we been doing as language testers ourselves, and particularly in the context of ALTE. And there's another little saying I thought I'd try my mouth at, which I think is something like, Nid oes dim nevid dan hayal. But hayal is what you look up and see in the sky, right? The sun. So this is one of our favorite sayings. Linda and I often come across this saying in different languages, and so there's a multilingual version of it dating back to, I think, something like 2,500 years ago in some dialect of Hebrew, which I couldn't possibly pronounce, which means that most things that you think about have already been done before. And that's taken from the Bible, but I like to think about it in relation to how we are trying to deliver our goals of the past now, and what that means for what we are going to deliver in the future, and whether there are some things eventually which we've been trying to do when there are many dilemmas of the kind that we are faced with by all kinds of social or other contexts and reasons, explained a little bit by Tony, we can actually get to the point where we change something in a more transformational way. And technology is one of those things which you keep looping back on. And this is this diagram, if you'd like to have a quick look at it. There's a red line in the middle, which I've borrowed this, which says that a lot of technology enhances what you've done before, but it does it by substituting something with something different, which at best leads to some form of functional improvement, but doesn't really change the whole thing you're trying to do. If you want to make change, you have to get above that red line and move towards modifications which allow for significant redesigns of things, like a task in our case, and potentially getting to the top where you can redefine, with the help of the technology, bear in mind this is technology, tasks, new tasks, which were previously inconceivable in two ways: not possible, or inconceivable because you weren't able to think about doing it that way because you didn't actually have the technology available to you. So this is a theme underlying what I'm talking about. But in ALTE, we're very used to coming up with solutions. We're doers, right? As I think so we actually have to work with what we've got. And over the last period of ALTE, we have worked with these concepts. We call them VRIP, and you know what they mean. And as somebody had once said about politics, it's the art of the possible. You can't do what you can't do, so you have to balance out what you are able to do to get the best outcomes under the circumstances. And we've been doing this now for a long time, and we set out how to do it in our principles of good practice, and we've developed a whole toolkit to help us. And we've added on, I think, a unique contribution of ALTE, this whole question of quality management and the Q mark. But the enduring challenge for speaking and interactivity and interaction is this issue of balancing reliability and practicality with the implications that has for validity and impact. So how are we doing on that? And then I think we've heard some of this over the course of the last few days of what solutions people come up with, but there seem to be recurrent barriers to what I would say is transformative change. So the last bit is are we getting close to that? And that picks up on the same point, I think, which Tony made at the end of his, by rethinking a little bit how we do learning and assessment in a wider societal way. So if things are balanced, in this diagram, everything in each square would have the same value, so that this diagram, each segment is the same. Actually, in practice, that doesn't happen usually. So when you're doing broad communicative tasks like speaking, interactive speaking, you're trying to focus on the interactivity and what that represents for learning a language, but you're struggling sometimes with the reliability and the practicality. And if you focus on the reliability and the practicality, you might find you're not having the impact or the type of construct you wanted. Narrow tests, for certain purposes, quite rightly might be okay with the reliability and practicality as the main point. Placement tests, for example, you might say easily delivered tests like elicited imitation. That might be a good idea. Well, spoken language assessment, set against the context of change that Tony did, has a very long history. And it's been supported by tech for a very long time. Do you like this picture? So, this is me trying to speak Welsh. The first thing you've got to be able to do is represent the language coming out of your mouth, so to be able to pronounce it. So a lot of, as soon as you had technology like this, you could actually hear it whenever you wanted, because you could record it and listen to it. So phonetics played a big part in the early direct teaching movement of the 20th century. Shouldn't say 1990s, it should say the 1900s, that's a typo. And soon after that, sorry about that, I'm thinking, what is he talking about? But soon after that, people doing examinations of the old kind started to appropriate some of this technology and were building it into their exams. So the Cambridge exams have had a speaking test right from the beginning, and that's in 1913. There was a slow burn in how it was taken up over the 20th century, but look, you've got dictation, reading aloud, and conversation. Wow. So that persisted, so I don't think it ever went away. And issues like reliability were not problematized perhaps in a psychometric way, but people were concerned about how you would train raters or how you would standardize examiners. And this is a record made in 1944 to standardize raters of the lower certificate who were examining Polish airmen. And this was so that they were giving standardized scores or outcomes. It's true, the psychometric structuralist era, led to a lot more technology which supported large-scale testing programs, certainly in the US, but Tony will tell us about where else that was happening, probably including in most people's country. But it was very dominant in the US, that move. So although Lardo, who most of you know, actually said in his book, the ability to speak is the most prized skill, he also said it's rather complex, messy, a bit impractical, and it tends to be unreliable. And we had a birth of the multiple choice, discrete point testing movement, supported by the most famous technology we've had in language testing, which is this, which has dominated a lot of testing worldwide and has had an impact on whether or not change happens. Because, this is rather cost-effective and practical. And of course, if you have a certain type of psychometrics, it's very reliable. So the first TOEFL, coming out of that era, and in addressing some of those issues in the States, had no speaking or writing. The Americans did have the FSI, the oral proficiency interview, that originated in the 50s, and it led to variants of that, which includes the actual framework for a variety of languages. So there is multilingual dimensions to this, not just about English. But Some people thought this was the bad old days, and this is not really getting to what language should be about. And so Keith Morrow called that era the Valley of Tears, or the Vale of Tears, using that metaphor, and that with the dawn of the communicative era, we were on the road to the promised land. And this is the beginning of this socio-psychological era, which Polsky called it, which is socio-cognitive, which we've seen later. And you'll all be familiar with this, which underpins just about everything we've been doing in ALTE, and the threshold is obviously B1. The introduction of fluency against accuracy, the can-do approach, functional language, and these books are the late 70s. So these are two books I bought in 1980 when I first started teaching. And guess what you find in them? You find stuff like integrating skills. 4 skills and integrating skills, Don Byrne, 1990. And you also have people moving towards the idea that testing is about performance testing. Not the 1990s, which I thought it was, thinking back with McNamara's stuff and others, but a long way back. But you could say, though, that there was a big shift towards 4 skills, and direct testing, as opposed to indirect testing, came in with the Council of Europe work. So let's talk. That's what we were supposed to do in classrooms. Pair work, group work, direct testing of speaking. So to do something, a task model, rather than to just show performance or show pronunciation. And that led to the face-to-face interviews becoming used in tests. And a lot of the early ALTE members already had speaking tests along these lines throughout the 80s. We did in Cambridge, but we moved from one-to-one tests to paired formats with 2 examiners and two candidates, thinking about reliability, but also making sure that we didn't throw the baby out with the bathwater, as the saying goes. So paired formats already in place by mid-80s. But not very practical if you are trying to do it on a large scale and you don't have the resources. So technology started to come in to simulate proficiency interviews. So you have things called SOPIs, simulated or semi-direct, which were using the technology of the era, which was a tape, later a computer, but where did I go? But this is, when I was first teaching, this was the new tech of the 1980s. Can you recognize it? That's the first NTT mobile phone, the size of a house brick. There's the Sony Walkman, which everybody wanted, because it was you could actually listen to language anywhere, and you could begin to think about how to put that in your test. So you didn't have to read out a passage for listening, you could have it recorded. And later, of course, that was substituted by the CD. That's a CD, not a DVD, which just come out. The thing in the middle, you recognize that? A fax machine. And apparently, there are some parts of the world which still use fax. Japan may well do. I believe they were one of them, but somebody else was saying they do. But the PC was just emerging. This gentleman here, you may recognize. It's a younger version of my co-author, Neil Jones. In 1985 or something in Japan, demonstrating the arrival of the new BBC educational personal computers designed for educational purposes. Most computers that were emerging, the IBM ones, you could put them in your classroom, as many Japanese schools did at the time, but there was no software for them. So you just have to admire the technology. And a lot of technologies come and gone over the years of, come and look at my smart whiteboard. Oh, what do you use it for? We don't know what to use it for, but the World Bank gave us 2 of them. This was a lot of technology has come along like that. So this is when ALTE comes in. This is after I'd been working as a teacher and tester for 10 years. The 1990s. Language testing coming into its own, new associations, ALTE being one of them, the World Wide Web, the Internet, frameworks and levels, CEFR in its first draft, ALTE's Code of Practice, 1994, the concept of striving for fairness. So we had fairness in there right back then. We've now added in and social justice, and the principle of good practice, which is in its revised form, which required you to make a validity argument to explain why and how you do testing with evidence. And performance testing, and the title performance testing, came in with many of us, alongside also the rise of the PC on your desk, which led to computer-based testing and computer adaptive testing. Those were already available in 1995. 95, 97. The first CB TOEFL was 97, right? Performance testing is a facets model. And this is a diagram I drew in 1993, which is, it predated Tim's model, but we were all on the same page, is that a speaking test is an event of different components. I love the man on the left there. Back then, the exam developer was a person in a suit. I put on my tie today to say that I can still do that, you know. But nowadays we'd have at least 3 or 4 women in that role as well. And then this in the interactivity of the constructing of an event with the participants, including the examiners and the candidates, in order to get a sample of language of some kind. So that's, we published that we expanded on it, we put it in this book, one of the CILT volumes. And this is a plug for CILT. Not because I want you to buy them, but I want you to have them free. Because the CILT series, which you may have heard of, is being closed down this year. We're not doing any more, but from June or July onwards, you'll be able to get all of the volumes free to download. And there are now 56 volumes. So that's a contribution to the field. This is the one that I edited with Mike Milanovic. And interestingly, it's got cognition in here. So the cognitive bit, the psycholinguistic testing of the kind we heard about with, I think the elicited imitation and also some of the stuff to do with vocabulary, psycholinguistics. So performance and cognition, so socio-cognitive already around then, not new. This was new back then, conversation analysis, so seeing the event as language, not simply as something, which you've elicited in a narrow sense. So what it is an oral proficiency interview like real language, a real conversation. So this is the book by Anne Nazarton. And we worked on all of the things that we tried to do to pin down, as I think Tony said, the event, but also to make sure it could expand in ways which are allowable in unpredictable ways. So we required the training of examiners monitoring and understanding their decision-making, including using things which Tess referred to, which is proto-verbal protocol analysis. So we had a lot of new qualitative methods, but it didn't solve the dilemmas. This is taken from a book by Eckstein and Noah, 1992, who says there are a number of persistent dilemmas. And really, it's about how you balance your decision-making. So this one I like. It's how to incorporate the new information technologies in the examination system and secure the promised benefits of greater efficiency and cost savings while safeguarding teaching and learning from undesirable side effects. Does that sound familiar? I can think of some very new tests which I'm a little bit worried about because they tend to err towards the efficiency and cost, but not necessarily advancing the field with regard to teaching and learning. So the dilemmas don't go away. They were always there. We've got some new ones. The turn of the century, of course, the big thing which we've all been working with, which has helped us in thinking about speaking interactions, the CEFR, its toolkit, the manuals we had for making sure that when we set standards, we're doing it properly, and further emergence of the socio-cognitive approach. ALTE's Q mark dates back, as I said earlier, to around 2005. And ALTE was a participant in the first European survey of language competencies, which predates PISA because it was done through the EU, which is called Surveylang, but it didn't have a speaking test. It did have a writing test, so they haven't got up to 4 skills yet, but they've decided that speaking is more important than writing. But that is a big point, that you moved out of the phone era into the smartphone era, and that has changed a lot. This is a book which I'm recommending to you, and I've been showing it. Linda Taylor edited this one. I think it's very useful because it covers a lot of the stuff we've been talking about this week. That one is in fact free to download as of this moment if you want to get a copy. And so please do, and it follows up some of the things we've been talking about. But we've been struggling now, I think, it's not new, I mean since 2007, with how to best make use of the new opportunities at the dawn of the 4th Industrial Revolution, the era of connectivity and data, which has all of these benefits, the processing power, the storage capacity, the access to knowledge it gives us, and the emerging technologies based on big data. We have been doing some good work supporting exam processes, automation, with basically coming from earlier versions of AI, and that includes auto markers for speaking. So there are machines out there which can mark certain aspects of speech. And that's not new. The 2010s, the last 15 years, we've seen the multilingual turn, translanguaging. Not a new term, it turns out. One which dates back to 1980 to the work of Ken Williams on, how do you pronounce it in Welsh? I can't pronounce it, but it's trans, the Welsh version of it, and then languaging in Welsh. And that was comes out of an approach to bilingualism in the Welsh context. So we've seen it now in other contexts, Ophelia Garcia and her work on it and others. And we have picked it up in ALTE around plurilingualism, and we have moved the dial towards the concept of plurilingual assessments, the work of Graham himself and stuff we've done together. The update on the manual has been trying to shift where we were in, I would say, in 1980, around the communicative approach and the 4 skills, towards something more akin to what I think we were hearing from Tony. I'll come on to that in a minute. But behind the scenes, without many people knowing, artificial intelligence was going on, the older versions of it with supervised machine learning. And that was coming up behind a lot of stuff that was going on, but most people didn't know, I don't think. Something then happened. But the 2010s onwards, the rise of learning-oriented assessment, I'm thinking of the approach which I have advocated, which I call a systemic or ecological approach. It builds in that sort of sociological idea of levels, but it's moving you towards not just doing testing, but integrating learning and assessment into wider social and educational processes. And that's taking a different view of the learner, not as of the test taker, but as a learner, very much at the heart. And how can you help the learner learn? And what do you need to do with all kinds of assessment to provide feedback and analysis which feeds into the learning process? And perhaps complexifies what you can do in terms of reporting back on it. So more like profiling. This is something which ALTE has been thinking about again, profiling skills rather than saying, well, you all have to be at B1 in all skills. The companion volume has very much put the spotlight on the communicative approach as the action-oriented approach. So the learner as a social agent beyond school. Plurilingualism forms part of that. And then modes rather than 4 skills, highlighting, of course, interaction, and mediation as a concept people had failed to notice in the first one, more or less. Computational psychometrics has emerged to go along with what's going on in use of AI. And then, of course, COVID hit, and we ended up with a new normal, which has a lot of hybridity in it, like work at home, work in the office. Blended learning, not just in one way or another. And that's where we've begun to see the rise of the mobile device, not without controversy, about how you can extend learning, how you can do assessment in different contexts. At home is one of them, but now we're seeing other opportunities. And of course, things like chatbots give you an opportunity to practice your Welsh, you know, when you're sitting in the park on your phone, and programs like Duolingo and the OWL, that's really changed the way people think about how to practice language. We move towards video conferencing. Everyone does Zoom now. It's a new normal. But that is a substitute, you know, of doing it face-to-face. But the ASR, the technology for automatic speech recognition, has really come on a long way. So you can talk to a machine that actually understands you, and we all do that now. Can you do it for all different languages and not just, if you like, normal speech, but for very early learner speech, which is where the pronunciation features are not natural? Well, that's a question, but there is progress. And then, of course, this happened. Really only 2 years ago. You know, it happened in November 22, but most people still hadn't heard about it for about 6 months. But it's really changed everything. So the question is, in relation to that red line and the availability of all the things I've been talking about, can we go further in changing what we do, addressing some of this, the curse of interactivity and interaction with the new technology? Not losing sight, however, when thinking about the dilemmas of the design, of the impact, and to ensure that the impact you have is built in by design, what you want to achieve, rather than what the technology allows you to do. And that it would be the same, in my opinion, for achieving ethical and social justice through the way you design the test at the beginning. So we've talked about accommodations or personalizing the testing experience for people with particular needs. This is something which people have been talking about for a long time. Authenticity, which isn't real, so virtual. Those Google goggles were around at least 10 years ago. These headsets are becoming cheaper, and they're becoming available as that little line at the bottom says about sales. So you can create virtual scenarios. Can we do our learning and assessment in virtual reality? I'm not thinking about the metaverse. I mean thinking about an educational bespoke virtual reality. So using digital tech plus educational generative AI, what are the implications for assessing spoken interaction? Can we use the technology and not just improve the reliability and practicality yet again? Can we address some of those validity and impact issues that we want and have been desirable for a long time? I think we probably can, but we do need to prepare ourselves better for AI, learning about the principles, and helping to constitute the necessary regulations and laws, and addressing the new ethical concerns which arise. You may have missed this, but just over a month and a half ago, nearly 2 months ago, there was a big conference in Paris of many countries and leaders in the AI world who came up with this declaration. And it's a very good document to look at. But really at the top of the agenda was, if you're going to rely on AI, you're going to have to rely on the technology to be available. So You can't build an unjust world where nobody has access to it. So you've got to address the digital divide, promote accessibility. Otherwise, you're just perpetuating unjust and unfair ways of doing things. Big buzzwords, which you've all been talking about, but sustainable is the one which comes out most recently, not just for, test takers, but for the planet. Is it something we can bet our future on? So I think it's a hopeful message, but it's a cautious message. So go away and think about the transformative nature of it and come back with some new ideas. That's my last slide. So there are plenty of resources if you haven't seen them from ALTE. Buy one, get one free. And this is another recent SILT volume, which is still not yet free, but it will be soon. It's a language test validation in the digital age by Guoxing Yu and Jing Xu. Got some interesting papers, including some on eye tracking and use of EEG techniques, other new technologies other than AI. So thank you very much. I'm sure you might have questions, but there's no time.